Hi, everyone. Maybe this is a question you can relate to, but have you ever thought about, am I having a hard week or a hard month, or maybe even a hard year? Or is it something more? And so this is a really important question because it addresses how do you understand your mental health as you age, and what do you do when it's the difference between going through something or whether it's a deeper issue. So, my name is Erin Hunter, and I am the senior editor here at Livelong Media. And I'm joined today by Amanda Krisher. She is the associate director of behavioral health at the National Council on Aging. And the goal of the National Council is that every person can age with health and economic well-being. So, what's really exciting today is that we're going to break down mental health. So, the signs of anxiety or depression that we should look out for, what's normal aging versus maybe what's not so normal, and then what are some of the actionable approaches that can support better mental health as we age, which would contribute to longevity, health, and feeling good. So, Amanda, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Erin. It's great to be here with you today.
I'm very excited because I think mental health is truly like gray. It's just the idea of it, you're constantly in flux. Life happens, and a lot of components about cognitive health and aging can really impact how we feel, even what we eat. So, to start though, I just wanted to ask that in your experience, have there been any particular habits or choices that you've noticed that have been associated with older adults who just appear healthier and more vital, and they appear like they just have a really optimistic outlook on life?
Yes, Erin, great question. I think one of the things that's really amazing about aging is that we're all doing it. First of all, every single one of us each day is going through that process. So it's not something that just happens to a certain group. It's a universal principle. And I think for older adults who are really doing it quote unquote well, as you might say, they are people who typically have some good coping mechanisms. We know that there's a lot of emotions that are associated with aging, and they kind of ebb and flow. There's positives, there's negatives, and when we have those right tools and resources, we can successfully navigate them. And I think that's what those older adults have sort of at the core. They recognize those emotions. They're able to determine, what do I need to do to move through this emotion or embrace this emotion and continue to enjoy life as they are in that moment.
You know, what's really hard is that I think a lot of times when individuals get older, it comes with health issues and other problems that could affect quality of life. And that can bring about, let's say, we'll call them negative emotions or bad emotions. You feel sad, you're angry that maybe your body isn't working the same. How do you cope with that though if maybe you never learned how to? Maybe you were told you're supposed to feel happy all the time. How do you embrace an emotion when it comes with something physical too, such as physical decline?
That's a great question. I think we really are in a point in our society where we need to kind of remind ourselves that our emotions are okay. Every day we experience a variety of emotions. So we have kind of six core emotions. It's that happy, sad, anger, fearful, joy. Those are sort of the kind of core emotions that we experience on a day-to-day basis. If we've not had the opportunity to sort of work through some of those emotions, it can make the aging process more difficult for some. In that situation, I think what's really critical is giving people an outlet to express those feelings. It's okay to be angry that your body is not working the way that it used to. Our bodies are changing every day. I mean, even for myself, I think about the things that I could do in my teens and 20s it's a little bit different now that I'm a few decades past that. And so I have to think about, how do I navigate this? Why is my body betraying me this way? I used to be able to just get up and do this thing, and now I can't. And that's so frustrating. And so I think giving people the opportunity to have that feeling, like sit in it for a little while, be angry, and then once you've had those few moments or however long to feel angry, then it's about what can I change? What can I do? If my body is not doing things the way that I want it to, we have to kind of reframe our thinking. In therapy, it's called cognitive behavioral therapy, where we're changing those negative thoughts and we're turning them into a more positive thought. So I can't do this. Maybe we replace that with, well, maybe this is a little bit more difficult, but now I can still do X, Y, and Z. So we're taking those negative emotions and we're reminding ourselves, what are the things that we still can do? What are the things that still help us feel like ourselves?
So is the idea ultimately that healthier agers that you've noticed feel confident in who they are despite this change and going through life? Is that the idea, that it's kind of identity too, that happiness is associated with identity?
It can absolutely be associated with identity. I think for older adults who are aging well, there's a few things that are typically a part of their experience. So usually they have really good social connections. We know that the more we're connected to others, the better we feel. It's the science, it's been researched, it's been studied, and it's really incredible. Just those simple interactions can have such a positive impact. So that's one piece, those social connections. The other part too is when we are taking care of our physical bodies, our mental health is better. So are we getting enough sleep? Are we eating the right foods? Are we being physically active in whatever capacity we can be? So that might mean changing things up. You're maybe not going to go for a 5 mile run, but maybe you're going to go for a mile long walk in your neighborhood instead, or do chair yoga or some Tai Chi, something along those lines. We also notice that older adults who have sort of that positive outlook tend to be the ones who are able to focus on those more positive emotions. So they may have some of those coping skills. Sometimes it's sort of a natural state for people where they just tend to be happier in general. And so just embracing that or encouraging people to find those joys, to find those positives is a great way to get people to build on that emotional coping mechanism.
Mm, okay, yeah, that's really interesting. And it's interesting that you mentioned for some it just comes more easily. I think I'm actually reading a book about this woman who's older, and as she's gotten older, she has gone through grief and life and things beat her down. And so I think what drove me to think about this topic is that some people, you say, can bounce back and have the coping, but some people, when life happens, it kind of pushes them deeper.
Mm-hmm.
So what I really think is something good that we can touch on is what is normal for aging and your mental health. Is it normal to sometimes feel less high highs and maybe feel a little bit more mellow when it comes to mood? And what's the difference between that and becoming stuck and maybe feeling symptoms of depression, which I know has a narrative that I'd like for you to go
Mm-hmm.
into, but what actually is depression, and when is it something that as we get older, we should worry about beyond just giving credit to aging and life
Mm-hmm.
happens?
Yeah, great question. I think a lot of people have this misconception that it is inevitable that as you get older, you will be depressed. Not the case. In fact, a very small percentage of older adults over the age of 70, it's about 4 or 5%, are actually diagnosed with depression. We know that there's many who probably experience symptoms of depression that aren't diagnosed, but it's not a normal part of aging. And so for your listeners, I think that's one really key takeaway. that depression is not inevitable. It's not a thing that we all have to experience as we age. The difference between when we're having sort of those lower lows or actual symptoms of depression is really about the consistency and the time frame. So we know that those emotions, those core emotions, they're going to ebb and flow day in, day out, week to week, month to month. When a person is experiencing depression, they are experiencing symptoms related to that diagnosis at least for 2 weeks at a time. So if those symptoms are more than 2 weeks and they are happening most days in that 2 weeks. So now people usually say to me, okay, well, what are those symptoms, Amanda? What are the things that I need to be looking out for? So a couple things to kind of highlight. Some people are really familiar with a screening that comes at their primary care doctor called the PHQ-2 or the PHQ-9. It's a patient health questionnaire, and it's a really quick tool for our doctors to kind of gauge, like, is this something that might be a concern? The types of questions that they ask are things like, are you feeling down, depressed, or hopeless? Are you not engaging in activities that you typically engage in? Have you experienced changes in your sleep patterns or your eating patterns? So are you sleeping too much? Sometimes the reverse is true for people where they start to sleep less. Are you eating more or are you eating less? There's another symptom that's really a little bit complex, but can be very telling for people is our bodies can sometimes naturally slow down when we're experiencing the chemical changes of depression. And it's called psychomotor retardation. So basically, I like to think of it as kind of feeling like you're moving underwater, like your movements are slower. It's more difficult to kind of move through the day. Opposite of that can also be true where people can get really restless and agitated. Typically, we see more of the slowing down. A person might also start to have feelings of sadness or hopelessness. They might be thinking about death or dying, or maybe even making a plan if their symptoms are so severe. So those are kind of the things to look out for. And it's again really about, are you experiencing those most days over a 2 week time period where we would really start to be concerned and say, we need some kind of intervention.
What's really crazy to me is that some of the symptoms you mentioned with is you feel like you're underwater. Are your eating habits changed? Are your sleep habits changed? So many of those things are also associated with illness and aging, though. Like the thing itself, aging, also comes with so many
Yes,
changes. And
it does.
so, isn't that kind of confusing to figure out? Am I in a healthy mental space, or is this actually happening to me physically first and it's manifesting then on a cognitive level?
Mm-hmm. So that is a great distinction. And I think a lot of times what we see happening is we don't always know, right? We don't know, are these symptoms related to a chronic condition? Are these symptoms related to a change in the person's mental health? So a real good assessment is going to look at both the physical and the mental. So if a person is experiencing changes in their sleep, they're really tired, they're fatigued, probably would be a good idea to do some testing for their physical health. Are their thyroid levels appropriate? Are they getting the right types of nutrients? Are they experiencing some type of internal bleeding that would maybe be causing that? So we need to kind of take a dual approach, look and make sure, are we addressing any chronic health issues or symptoms? And then once we've sort of gone through that roster of potential options and they're still experiencing these symptoms, that's when we're going to go and say, okay, now we need to look at the other side and figure out, okay, it's not related to a physical issue. So now it's probably going to be related to a mental health concern. And once we have that sort of pathway, then we can determine the right type of treatment.
Um, something that's really actually well studied in longevity and aging is that optimistic people tend to have longer lives in better health. There's science to that. There's a lot of evidence supporting that depression can be associated with other ill health outcomes. And I think not only is this an interesting science, but I kind of want to touch on the point with you about those who are listening to this. Okay, wait a minute. Maybe if there's something going on there mentally, it is this something that's going to affect their health as they age, or is this something that is there a way, I guess what I'm trying to ask is this not, how do you mitigate how scary this is based on statistics and based on stigma, even still, that, oh no, am I screwed if I'm going through a moment where
Mm-hmm.
I'm experiencing low mood and these feelings of depression and I'm told by science, oh no. Is there, do we, should we be basing this on those studies, or is this something else?
I think the important thing to remember is that studies give us knowledge, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the knowledge is going to translate for every single person. So it's good to know that there are things that we call them, sort of the kind of positive things that we have in our lives that support our health and well-being. And then we have risk factors. So those risk factors are things that they usually study. Like if you are more prone to depression, you may be more prone to X, Y, or Z conditions. If you have these conditions, you might be more prone to mental health concerns. A risk factor doesn't necessarily mean that the person is actually going to experience that particular outcome. I think about some research studies around Alzheimer's and dementia, where they were studying a group of, I believe they were nuns, that had the gene for Alzheimer's dementia. And they were studying them and kind of checking to see like what their cognitive health was over this period of time.
Just really
And
quick, what is that
yeah,
gene for everyone?
oh, that's, I knew you were going to ask me that.
Because I know there's one people talk about called APO4E, I
Yeah,
believe,
there's
or
a few.
APOE4.
Yeah, there's a few that that can be associated with that. I don't remember exactly which gene in particular they were looking at in this study, but great question.
That's
Everyone's gonna
okay. No,
everyone's gonna go Google that now. What's the gene?
what's the
um,
gene?
what's the gene? But I what I loved about it was that even though these women had this gene that could have very well meant that they were going to experience cognitive decline, their actual day-to-day experience did not show that because they were engaged in things that were protective factors. So they were social, they were continuing to keep their minds busy. So research and science is amazing and it has helped us learn so very much. I don't ever want anyone to panic though when they read something because it's just one piece to the puzzle. It's one little bit of information that can help us make the best decisions possible. But at the end of the day, there isn't going to be a cookie cutter approach because we're all different and our bodies are all different. So the more we know, the more we can make the best choices for ourselves and hopefully mitigate some of those risk factors.
Okay. Yeah, and I appreciate you explaining that distinction because I think my question was a little too wraparound, but I'm someone who's very black and white. If I read one thing, I think, oh my goodness, this means it happens for everyone. And I
Mhm.
think we're all prone to that a little bit because of
Mhm.
sensationalized journalism a lot of times because the headlines are the squeakiest wheel.
Mhm.
Um, but there's a lot more nuance there, it sounds like. And there is, from what I'm understanding, you can absolutely age healthy and not develop diseases or certain conditions that may be associated with having moments of depression or different mental health issues throughout your life.
I think the other thing that's really important to recognize too is that if you are having a moment of a mental health concern, getting treatment is going to reduce that risk of any other potential negative consequences. If we let our diabetes, for example, go uncontrolled, we know what the impact of that is. We know that there's going to be a lot of physical health challenges that come with that. The same thing is true with our mental health. If we aren't addressing it, if we aren't seeking treatments, whether that's medication, therapy, or even our own types of self care, then we are increasing our risk. So it's challenging because, as you mentioned, there is a lot of stigma around mental health. And if we think about this generation of older adults, the time frame that they grew up in and what was happening in the mental health space was extremely negative. You think about electroshock therapy, people were in mental institutions. Most older adults have a sort of negative view about mental health treatment because of what they saw in their formative years. So as clinicians, we have to kind of change the narrative and get them to understand that it's not like that anymore, thank goodness. And there are a lot of effective ways that we can support a person's mental health that don't involve you laying on a couch in a therapist's office talking about your childhood, which I think is a lot of times what people sort of envision. But it's about finding the things that are meaningful to you, engaging in those self-care activities, creating that social support and that network. Maybe it's medication. I talk to people a lot about, if somebody says to you, okay, we are diagnosing you with high blood pressure, for example, what are the things that we can do to solve that or to reduce the symptoms of that? Well, we can, do proper exercise. We're probably going to take a medication to lower that blood pressure. And that's just accepted in our society. When we think about mental health and we say, okay, now I've been diagnosed with depression and I need to take a medication, there's more of a negative to that. But what I remind people is that high blood pressure is some type of chemical imbalance in your body. And so the medication brings that chemical back into balance. Depression, chemical imbalance in our brains, and that medication can bring that chemical back into balance, resulting in a healthier us. So when you change sort of the thinking on it, sometimes people are a little more receptive to that because I said, if I told you just try harder with your high blood pressure, people will be like, no, I need my medication. Like that's what keeps me healthy. And I'm like, okay, so let's just replace high blood pressure with depression, anxiety, whatever it might be. And now we can see, oh, there is that same kind of connection and it's the same type of support, just a different part of our body.
That's a really important but similar distinction between different conditions. In longevity, we often talk about lifestyle, and I think maybe a question everyone is wondering as we age, when is lifestyle enough though? Like when is lifestyle enough, but when is it time where, you know what, it's not cutting it. I want to be happier as I continue to age, and I want to prevent as many conditions, and I want to support as healthy of a life as possible. So what's when do you know?
When do you know? That's a great question. And again, that like moment of knowing is going to be different for each person. But I think what's really important is recognizing when does that individual feel like whatever they're experiencing, symptoms of depression, anxiety, grief, loss, when those symptoms are starting to impact their ability to function on a day-to-day basis, that's usually a good sign that we need to do something about it. So when we feel like I'm not myself, and we all, by the time we get into our later years, we know ourselves pretty well, and we usually can tell like, I don't know, this isn't how I normally feel. I don't like this. when you start to have those kind of thoughts, that's usually a good time to say, oh, okay, maybe it's time to do something about this. And it might be just starting with a primary care doctor and truthfully answering those questions on that PHQ 2 or 9 screening so that someone can say, oh, okay, Amanda, I see that you are starting to have some challenges with these emotions and maybe some symptoms of depression. Let's talk about what the options are.
And as as we're entering 2026 almost, and the world has so many tools and technologies and all this stuff, I just really quickly, like as we are ending our talk here, I wanted to get your opinion on one, ChatGPT. I just read a story about ChatGPT therapist and, using it for that way, and what are the pros, cons about it. And then also, I would just love to pick your brain about one or two apps or different resources people might not know about, especially that may be catered to aging adults who want to spend more of their years in better health and better mental health.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's tackle the Chat GPT
Let's do it. We
AI.
gotta do it. We gotta do
It is. It's
it.
there. It's a part of it. It's interesting because I was just at a conference on social connection, and it was one of the topics, and I'm still sort of wrapping my brain around it. I think that there's a lot of positivity that comes with AI. It can be a really helpful and useful tool. It is not a replacement for a person. And so I think one of the things that I took away from the conference and the conversations that I engaged in around AI is that the longer that you have a conversation with AI, the more likely there is to start to be errors. And so short conversations, maybe directing someone on where to connect with mental health services or support could be a really great use of that particular tool. Nothing is going to replace a human who can be empathetic and understanding of another person's emotions, though. And so, really, I think we are in a place in our society where we are trying to figure out how do we effectively use this tool, because there's a lot of ways that it could really positively impact our society and our people. But we also know that it is not necessarily going to give you that same positive emotion that comes with connecting with an individual. But one thing that was interesting that stood out to me in one of the conversations at the conference was somebody pointing out, human relationships are messy. There's a lot of emotions in human relationships. Um, Whereas AI is sometimes a little bit easier or safer because you don't necessarily get that negative emotion back because it doesn't have feelings. And so when we are able to solve the problem of having good connections with people, when we can build those skills around empathy and emotional intelligence, we're going to be less likely to turn to that particular option. So I know that's kind of a long sort of, I didn't really say yes or no, but I think there's positives and there's also things that we just need to be careful of and be safe with.
I understand. And I like the nuance you pointed out there. And particularly, I didn't know it made more errors as time went on. I think that's a really interesting point that maybe not a lot of us would consider. So it's just
Mhm.
like short questions and a great resource compiler from what
Mhm.
it sounds like.
Yes.
Um, so just to give a quick takeaway and recap of what we talked about today. So can we quickly recap the difference between mainly depression and just feeling emotions? And then, in particular, as people are aging and as our bodies change and our brains do change because of natural cognitive shifts, what can we continue to do on a daily basis and conscientiously to support healthy mental health and emotional health?
Mhm. Great. So again, I think the difference really between that sort of day-to-day sadness, that sort of ebb and flow emotion versus the depression is that those depression symptoms are consistent, lasting for about 2 weeks and happening most days for people. And usually we don't always see kind of the spikes. Like if we're having sort of periods of sadness, we usually are going to kind of go up and down with our emotions. The depression usually tends to be relatively flat or down. And so that's kind of another sort of indicator is are you really feeling that down for that long period of time? And as we think about what are the things that we can do to support our mental health and well-being as we age, my favorite thing to talk about and to encourage people to do is finding the things that matter to you when it comes to self-care. And so self-care doesn't have to be a big thing. It doesn't have to be vacation. It doesn't have to be a spa day. It could be 5 minutes writing in a journal. It could be having a coffee date with your friend. It could be going for a walk in your neighborhood or in a nice wooded area. Being outside in nature is a great self-care strategy. And so I would encourage all the listeners to think about what are the things that make me feel better when I'm feeling down. It's really helpful to write them down on an index card or someplace where you can kind of pull it out. Because when you're having that moment of, ooh, I'm not feeling myself, being able to have something physical to remind ourselves, okay, in this moment, maybe I need to go for a walk, or maybe I need to get a puzzle out, or maybe I need to go fishing, whatever the case might be. Really drilling down into what self-care strategies work for you and doing those on a day-to-day basis is really going to help us continue to improve our mental well-being.
That's the doing part. That's fabulous. Like not just looking at it, but saying, okay, despite w this feeling in this moment, I'm gonna do it, even if it's the
Mhm.
small thing. Thank you for bringing your perspective. And it's not flashy, all of this stuff. It's not flashy. It's not the newest thing, but from working with people, you're finding this is what works. I mean,
Mhm.
it's not the bells and whistles. It's just life.
Mhm. It's those
Thank you.
connections and that self-care really matter.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. And I hope everyone has a really good understanding about how to tune into their minds and their bodies and hopefully figure out with a little more clarity, hey, all right, where am I? And is this okay? Or is this something that requires a little more in order to get to where I want to be?
Thank you so much, Erin. I appreciate the time.
Thank you.